The year was 1429, and France was dying. For nearly a century, the kingdom had been locked in the 100 Years' War with England, a slow, bloody conflict that had drained its lifeblood and eroded its spirit. English troops roamed the countryside, and French nobles bickered over scraps of power while peasants starved. The kingdom's fate seemed sealed, until a young peasant girl claimed to hear the voice of God. Her name was Joan of Arc. Gilles de Rais, then in his mid-20s, was one of France's most promising young knights. Born into nobility in 1405, heir to vast estates in Brittany and Anjou, Gilles had every privilege: wealth, education, and a military upbringing. But what set him apart wasn't simply his birth, it was his ferocity. Those who saw him in battle spoke of his almost theatrical presence, clad in gleaming armor, his banner high, his sword cutting through the chaos like a silver arc. He met Joan during the siege of Orleans, the moment that would turn him from a mere soldier into a legend. Joan's divine conviction electrified the troops. Gilles, already a commander, found himself drawn not just to her courage, but to her unshakable belief. Together, they fought side by side in battles that shifted the tide of the war. The chroniclers of the time wrote of Gilles as one of the bravest knights in France. He was appointed Marshal of France, one of the highest military honors, before he was 30. Victory followed victory. At the coronation of Charles VII in Reims, Gilles stood at Joan's side, holding the sacred sword of the ceremony. For a brief, shining moment, he was the embodiment of chivalric glory. But the light would not last. When Joan was captured by the Burgundians in 1430, Gilles was powerless to save her. Whether through politics, distance, or fate, he did not ride to her rescue. She was sold to the English, tried for heresy, and burned at the stake in 1431. Her death marked a turning point in Gilles' life. The chronicles grow quiet about his military deeds after that year. Some say he was disillusioned, others claim he squandered his fortune in extravagant pageantry. He staged elaborate theatrical productions, grand, costly spectacles with hundreds of actors, musicians, and exotic costumes. His castles became centers of lavish feasts, bizarre entertainments, and, whispered in corners, things far darker. The hero of France was transforming into something else. Something monstrous. In the years following Joan of Arc's death, Gilles de Rais seemed to drift without purpose. The war still raged, but the once great knight turned his focus away from the battlefield. Instead, he retreated into his estates in Brittany, where his immense wealth allowed him to indulge in whims that would have bankrupted lesser men. At first, the tales were harmless enough, Gilles spending fortunes on grand theatrical plays, commissioning gold-embroidered costumes for entire casts, importing rare spices for banquets that lasted for days. He surrounded himself with musicians, alchemists, and scholars, eager to entertain or enlighten him. But the shadows began to lengthen. Neighbors whispered that he had a strange fascination with the occult. Traveling alchemists spoke of performing rituals in his great halls, ceremonies intended to summon demons or conjure treasures from nothing. Some claimed to have seen strange symbols etched into the walls of his chambers, and heard chanting late into the night. And then, the children began to disappear. It started quietly. A young page sent to deliver a message never returned. A peasant boy vanished after being offered work at the castle. At first, these were isolated incidents, dismissed as the dangers of rural life in an unstable kingdom. But the pattern grew. Villages near Gilles' estates began to whisper about the Marshal of France, the hero who had once ridden beside Joan. The rumors were unspeakable, too vile to repeat in daylight. According to later testimonies, Gilles lured children, mostly boys, some girls, into his service with promises of food, clothing, or apprenticeship. Once inside the walls of his castles, they were never seen alive again. The accounts of what happened to them are among the most disturbing in medieval history, acts of cruelty and violence that even hardened inquisitors would struggle to write down. Whether all the charges were true, or whether some were the product of political enemies and an eager church, remains a subject of debate. But what is certain is that by 1440, the tide had turned against Gilles de Rais. His fortune was dwindling, his alliances fraying, and the church had begun to take an interest. It was the abduction of a young cleric, more politically dangerous than the loss of peasant children, that finally set events in motion. The Bishop of Nantes launched an investigation, gathering testimonies from parents, servants, and even Gilles' former accomplices. The picture they painted was one of unthinkable depravity. In September 1440, Gilles de Rais was arrested. The hero of Orleans, the Marshal of France, the man who had once stood beside a saint, was to face the judgment of God and man. The trial of Gilles de Rais was unlike anything medieval France had seen before. It was not a brief proceeding designed to quietly remove a political nuisance. This was a spectacle, a public unmasking of a national hero turned alleged monster. The court in Nantes drew crowds from across Brittany, curious peasants, grim-faced clergy, and nobles eager to watch the mighty fall. The charges were read aloud, each one more horrifying than the last: abduction, sodomy, ritual murder, heresy, and dealings with demons. Even in an age of brutal warfare and casual violence, the accusations shocked. The chroniclers record audible gasps as the long list was recited. At first, Gilles denied everything. He spoke eloquently, appealing to his noble status, denouncing his accusers as liars driven by greed and jealousy. His presence still carried traces of the knightly charisma that had once inspired soldiers on the battlefield. But the prosecution was relentless. Witness after witness came forward, servants who had seen blood-stained clothes burned in the fireplace, accomplices who described in chilling detail the games Gilles played with his victims before killing them. Parents, trembling and weeping, recounted how their children vanished after being seen near his castles. Then came the evidence of the occult. Among the items seized from Gilles' chambers were strange manuscripts, bizarre talismans, and instruments said to be used in necromantic rituals. An Italian alchemist named Prelati testified that Gilles had hired him to summon demons, promising to sacrifice parts of children's bodies in exchange for gold. The court was gripped by a mix of horror and fascination. Was Gilles truly a servant of the devil, or a brilliant man driven to madness by grief, guilt, and unchecked indulgence? The turning point came when the threat of excommunication was brought against him. For a devout Catholic noble, this was more terrifying than any earthly punishment. On October 21, 1440, Gilles de Rais broke. He confessed. His admission was detailed, almost theatrical, as if part of him wanted the world to know the depths he had sunk to. He spoke of killing more children than I can count, of feeling an almost ecstatic pleasure in their suffering, of offering their remains in mockery of holy rites. He wept, not for the victims, but for his own damnation. The confession sealed his fate. The sentence was swift. On October 25, 1440, the court declared Gilles de Rais guilty on all counts: murder, sodomy, heresy, and invoking demons. His noble titles, his military honors, his status as a Marshal of France, none of it could save him now. The punishment was death. That morning, the city of Nantes awoke to the tolling of bells. Crowds gathered on the meadow of the Prairie de la Madeleine, just outside the city walls, where a great wooden scaffold had been erected. Soldiers kept order, though the people needed little encouragement. They had come to see justice done. Gilles was led to the execution site under heavy guard. He wore a black robe, the hood pushed back to reveal his pale, handsome face. Chroniclers noted that he seemed calm, almost relieved. Before the gathered crowd, he addressed the parents of his victims, begging them to forgive him, not for their sake, but for the salvation of his soul. Some wept, others spat at the sight of him. The method of execution was both hanging and burning. Gilles was first hanged by the neck, his body left to sway briefly in the autumn air. Then the ropes were cut, and his corpse was laid upon the pyre. Flames consumed the man who had once been hailed as a hero of France, and the smoke curled upward into the grey Breton sky. In a final strange gesture, his remains were removed from the fire before they were completely reduced to ash. They were buried in consecrated ground, an honor denied to most heretics. Perhaps it was a lingering echo of his noble birth, or perhaps the Church, even in condemning him, could not quite erase the memory of the knight who had fought beside Joan of Arc. Yet history would not be kind. For centuries, Gilles de Rais' name became synonymous with evil, a cautionary tale of how power and privilege, left unchecked, can lead to unimaginable corruption. His story fed legends, inspiring folk tales, and even modern fiction. Most famously, the French fairy tale of Bluebeard, the wealthy nobleman who murdered his wives. Some revisionist historians in later centuries would argue that Gilles had been the victim of a political conspiracy, his crimes exaggerated or fabricated to seize his lands. But the sheer number of testimonies, the consistency of details, and his own chilling confession make the darker version of events far more likely. Thus, Gilles de Rais remains one of the most haunting figures of the Middle Ages. a man who rose to the heights of chivalric glory and plunged into the deepest abyss of human depravity.